It was a Tuesday morning in early December, the kind of morning that Wellington does better than anywhere else in the world. Sharp blue sky, wind off the harbor with just enough bite to remind you that summer hadn't quite settled in yet, and the pohutukawa trees along the front starting to blush red at the tips. I was out in the backyard replacing a rotted fence, paling when my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. I pulled off my work glove and checked the screen, expecting a message from my mate Dennis about whether the fishing was worth driving down to Palliser Bay on the weekend. Instead, it was a text from my daughter-in-law, Fiona. Just 2 lines. "Hi, Graham. Hope you're well. Would you mind checking your email when you get a moment? Sent you something about the Christmas arrangements. Thanks." People don't send emails about Christmas arrangements when the news is good. Good news comes as a phone call. Good news comes as a voice. I set the hammer on top of the fence post and walked inside. I made a cup of tea first. That's not procrastination, that's just sense. You don't want to read something that might upset you while you're still holding a hammer. The subject line was, "Christmas plans, wanted to give you a heads up with plenty of time." I opened it and read slowly. "Hi, Graham. Hope things are good down in Eastbourne. Tom and I have been talking with my parents about the holidays, and since Mum and Dad are flying up from Queenstown for the full fortnight, we've decided to keep Christmas Day itself as an immediate family occasion this year. We want the kids to have a calm, relaxed day without too many moving parts. We know how much you do for us, especially with everything around Lachie's schooling costs. And we'd love for you to come by on the 27th or 28th for lunch and some time with the grandkids. We really appreciate your understanding. Warmly, Fiona." I read it twice. Then I set the laptop on the kitchen table and looked out at the garden. Immediate family. I'd heard that phrase used to describe the kind of people who get to be in the room when things matter. I'd thought, apparently incorrectly, that I was one of them. My grandson, Lachie, was 7 years old. He'd been diagnosed 2 years earlier with dyslexia and some processing difficulties that made school feel like wading through deep mud for him. He was bright. Anyone who spent 5 minutes with him could see that. But the standard classroom wasn't built for the way his mind worked. The specialist learning support he needed wasn't cheap. The tutoring sessions 3 afternoons a week, the educational psychologist assessments, the specific reading program materials, the occupational therapist who helped him with focus and sensory regulation, it added up fast. Over the past 22 months, I'd contributed just over $34,000 toward Lachie's learning support. I want to be clear about something. Nobody asked me to. My son Tom had mentioned, in the careful way that men mention things they're embarrassed to need help with, that they were thinking about reducing Lachie's tutoring from 3 sessions to 1 because the costs were stretching them thin. He wasn't asking. He was just telling me the way you tell your dad things, so you're not carrying it entirely by yourself. I didn't hesitate. I called the tutoring center that same afternoon and arranged for the invoices to come directly to me. Lachie was starting to read. Not fluently. Not yet. But he was getting there. Last month he'd read me an entire page of a chapter book without stopping, finger tracing under each line, tongue pressed to the corner of his mouth in concentration. When he got to the end, he looked up at me with an expression I will never forget as long as I live, like he'd climbed something and was surprised to find himself at the top. His little sister Mara had clapped from the couch. I hadn't trusted myself to speak for a moment. That was what $34,000 had bought. Not a boat, not a renovation, not a holiday to Fiji. A 7-year-old boy learning that he wasn't broken, and now I wasn't invited to Christmas. I sat at the kitchen table for a while and looked at the pohutukawa in the front garden. My late wife Margaret had planted it when we moved to this house, the year Tom started secondary school. She'd been gone 4 years now. Ovarian cancer. The kind that moves quietly, and then all at once. In the years since, I'd learned to reorganize my life around the grandchildren, The way you reorganize a room after something large has been removed from it, you move things around until the space makes sense again. The Saturday afternoon visits to Tom and Fiona's place in Kandala. The school pickup every Wednesday when they both had late meetings. The trips to Zealandia with Lachie, who could name 17 native bird species before he could read a single one of them, and thought that was perfectly reasonable. I didn't call Tom that afternoon. I've learned, at 63, that the first thing you want to say, in a moment like that, is rarely the right thing. Instead, I went back outside and kept working on the fence. That evening, I opened a folder on my computer and began pulling things together. Bank transfer records showing every payment to the tutoring center and the educational psychologist. Receipts for school uniforms, the specialist reading program, the workbooks, the birthday presents, screenshots of messages, one from Fiona 6 months ago, that said, "I genuinely don't know how we'd be managing without your help, Graham." Truly, and a voice message from Tom that I'd saved without quite knowing why, where he said, "Dad, you're doing more for this family than you probably realize. It means a lot." I saved the folder under a simple name. I didn't know yet what I'd do with it, but I wanted the facts in one place before I made any decisions. The next morning I did something I rarely do. I looked at Fiona's Instagram page. There was a post from 3 days earlier. It was a screenshot of a booking confirmation for a beach house in Waiheke Island, the kind of place with a native timber deck over the water and a chef's kitchen and a fire pit in the garden. 7 nights. The week between Christmas and New Year. The caption said, "So excited for this one. The kids are going to have the most magical summer. Grateful for family. Grateful for family." Lachie's January block of tutoring sessions, 8 weeks worth, would be invoiced to me at the start of the month. The amount would come to just over $3,000. I closed the laptop. I made another cup of tea. I took my old lab, Chester, down to the waterfront and walked the path along the harbor for a long time, watching the ferries cross to Petone and back. Chester is 12 now, gray around the muzzle, and he walks slowly enough that you have no choice but to do the same. That slowness is a gift. Sometimes, I thought carefully about what I wanted to say, and more importantly, about what kind of man I wanted to be when I said it. When I got home, I sat down and wrote a reply to Fiona's email. "Hi, Fiona. Thanks for letting me know about Christmas and for giving me plenty of notice. I understand your parents' visit is important and that you want the day to be relaxed for the kids. I do want to make sure we're on the same page about one thing. I happened to see your post about the Waiheke house over the holidays. Looks wonderful. And I know the children will love it. I just want to check in about the January tutoring invoice, which comes to me as usual at the start of the month. I'd like to be thoughtful about how we plan things going forward. Could we find a time to have a quick call this week? Thanks, Graham." I reread it 4 times. It was measured. It stated facts without accusation. It asked a question rather than making a declaration. I pressed send. 2 hours later, Tom rang. His voice had a particular quality to it that I recognized from when he was a teenager, caught in something he hadn't thought all the way through. "Dad, I got a message from Fiona. She said your email came across as a bit passive-aggressive." "Tom." I kept my voice level. I asked a question. "That's not passive-aggressive. That's communication. She's upset. I imagine she is. I'm a little upset too, if I'm honest." A pause. "Dad, the Waiheke house is a gift from her parents. It's not coming out of the household budget. It doesn't affect the tutoring." "I understand that," I said, "but can you see how it might look from where I'm standing? Her parents fund the family holiday, and the same week she sends me an email telling me I'm not invited to Christmas Day, and I'm the one covering Lachie's learning support every month." Silence on the line. "That's not how we meant it to come across," Tom said. How did you mean it to come across? Another pause. Longer. Her parents only get up from Queenstown a couple of times a year. They wanted the day to feel special, less chaotic. Her parents are in Queenstown, I said. I'm in Eastbourne, 20 minutes away. I see those kids most weeks. I pick Lachie up from school on Wednesdays. I'm the one he calls when he's had a hard day. And I'm being asked to come by on the 27th. Dad, Tom. I said his name quietly, not sharply. I love you. I love Fiona. I love those children more than I have language for. But I need you to hear this. I cannot keep showing up financially and emotionally for this family while being treated like an optional extra. That's not a relationship. That's a service arrangement, and I don't want to be part of a service arrangement with my own son. I heard him exhale slowly. What do you want me to say? I want you to think about what I've just said. Really think about it. And then I'd like the three of us to sit down and talk in person, not over email. You, me, and Fiona, and Mum's parents? Do they need to be there? If they're part of how decisions get made in your household, then yes, I think they should be. The silence that followed was long enough that I wondered if he was still there. I'll talk to Fiona, he said finally. Thank you, son. I waited several days. Nothing came back. No follow-up from Tom, no reply from Fiona, no acknowledgement that the conversation had happened at all. I kept myself occupied the way I always do when something is sitting unsettled. I worked with my hands. There was a wooden toy chest I'd been building for Mara's birthday in February. I worked on that, sanding and fitting the joints in the evenings, letting my hands stay busy while my mind worked through things at its own pace. My father was a quiet man who had come up through hard circumstances and never felt the need to advertise it. He used to say that silence is fine when it's honest. But silence used to avoid accountability is just another word for cowardice. I'd spent too many years tolerating the comfortable kind of silence, the kind where you let something go because confronting it feels like more trouble than it's worth. I was 63 years old, and I was done being comfortable in the wrong way. On the 15th of December, an email arrived from Fiona. Warm, friendly, no reference whatsoever to our last exchange. Hi, Graham. Just a reminder that Lachie's January tutoring block kicks off on the 7th. The center mentioned they'll send the invoice to you as usual at the start of January. He had such a good session last week. His tutor said he read a whole paragraph aloud without any prompting, which is massive for him. Hope you're having a lovely December. F. I sat with that email for a moment. Not angry. Exactly. Clear. She had decided we weren't going to talk about it. She was going to send a cheerful update about Lachie, trust that the money would arrive as usual, and carry on as if nothing had been said. I was to spend Christmas Day alone in Eastbourne while her parents enjoyed the family Christmas I had substantially funded. And then I was to keep paying for the tutoring in January. I opened the folder on my computer. I added the email to it. Then I wrote back, Hi Fiona, that's wonderful news about Lachie and I'm so proud of him. I did want to follow up on my earlier email, as I haven't heard back and I think it's important that we speak before the end of the month. I'd like to have an honest conversation about our family arrangement going forward, including the tutoring support. Could we please set a time to meet? I think in person would be best. Graham. This time Tom rang in less than 40 minutes. Dad, what do you mean going forward? Are you saying you're going to stop Lachie's tutoring? I'm saying I'd like to have a conversation before I make any decisions. That's all I've said. He needs those sessions. You know what he's been through. You've seen it yourself. I know exactly what he's been through. I've been at every assessment, every review meeting. That's actually part of what I want to talk about. A long pause. Then, quietly, Okay. When? Saturday. My house. 2 o'clock. You and Fiona. And if your in-laws are still in town, I'd like them there too. Tom hesitated. They're flying back on the 20th. Then the 19th works. Bring them. On Saturday the 19th, they pulled into my driveway at 2:05. Tom looked tired. The way he gets when he's been managing everyone around him and running out of room for himself. Fiona looked composed in the careful way people look composed when they're actually braced for something. Her mother, Judith, was a small, neat woman with an expression of polite skepticism. Her father, Neville, was large and unhurried. The kind of man who walks into rooms as if he's already decided they suit him. I'd set the kitchen table with 4 chairs and a pot of coffee. No performance. Just a table. Thanks for coming, I said. Please sit down. Neville glanced around the kitchen with mild interest. The way someone looks at a house they're deciding whether to take seriously. I waited until everyone was settled before I spoke. I want to start by saying that I love my son. And I love Fiona. And Lachie and Mara are the best part of my life since I lost Margaret. I'm not here to upset anyone. I'm here because there are some things that need to be said out loud. And I've always found that problems don't actually get smaller when you look away from them. I slid a single printed page across to Tom and Fiona. I'd kept it simple. No performance, just facts. In the past 22 months, I've contributed just over $34,000 toward Lachie's learning support. That's the tutoring, the educational psychologist, the occupational therapy, the reading program materials. It doesn't include birthday presents, school stationery, the school camp fees I covered last March, or the petrol for 2 years of Wednesday pickups. I've done this because I love Lachie and because I believe wholeheartedly in what the support is doing for him. I didn't do it to hold it over anyone. I looked at each of them in turn, but I received an email telling me I'm not part of the Christmas Day gathering. And a few days later I saw a post about a 7-night Waiheke booking, which from what I could find online runs somewhere around $6,000 or $7,000 for that property over that period. And I'm sitting here trying to understand how those two things belong in the same week. Neville opened his mouth. I'd appreciate it if you'd let me finish, Neville. He closed it again. He looked mildly surprised. I suspected it had been some time since anyone had said that to him. I have no issue with the Waiheke trip. If you want to give your daughter's family a gift, that's entirely your business. And it's generous. What I'm talking about is the pattern. When money is needed for Lachie's care, I'm family. When it's a question of who sits at the Christmas table, I'm a thoughtful gesture on a different day. I've let variations of this happen too many times, and I'm not going to let it happen again. Fiona's eyes were bright. Tom was staring at the grain of the table. Neville, I said, turning to him. You've been making yourself the center of this family's decisions for a while now. I've watched it happen. You fly up from Queenstown. The whole household reorganizes itself around your preferences, and then you fly back south. I don't think you mean harm by it. I think you love your daughter and you love those kids, and that comes out in a way that takes up a lot of space. But somewhere along the way, my son has stopped pushing back because it's easier not to. And that's had some consequences. Neville's jaw tightened. I didn't come here to be accused of. I'm not accusing you of anything, I said. I kept my voice the same even, unhurried. I'm describing what I've observed over 4 years. There's a difference. I gave him a moment. You are Lachie and Mara's grandfather on their mother's side. That's real, and it matters, and I've never wanted to diminish it. But you don't get to make yourself the one who counts more just because you fly in with a larger gesture. Presence isn't measured in the cost of a beach house. The kitchen was very quiet. I looked at Tom. Son, I need to hear from you. Tom raised his eyes. He looked at Fiona. He looked at Neville. And then he looked at me with the expression he'd had at 15 when he was deciding whether to tell me the truth about something. He was 40 now. And he had the same expression. And I loved him so much in that moment that it was difficult to stay still. He cleared his throat. You're right, Dad. His voice was rough at the edges. We've been taking advantage of you. I don't think we sat down and decided to, but that's what's been happening. And I've let it happen because it's easier to avoid the argument. That's not good enough. That's not how I was raised. He looked at Neville not unkindly, but directly. I should have spoken up before now. That's on me. Fiona made a small sound. There were tears on her face. Tom, she started. No, he said gently. He's right. She was quiet for a moment. Then she looked at me. Graham. Her voice was steadier than I expected. I owe you a real apology. Not a qualified one. I wrote that email about Christmas because Dad suggested it, and it seemed practical, and I didn't stop to think about what it meant from your side. And then when you brought it up, I ignored it and sent you the tutoring reminder as if nothing had been said. I knew that was wrong. I knew it when I was typing it. I'm sorry. Neville was quiet for a moment. He had the look of a man who was genuinely working through something uncomfortable, which I suspected was not a familiar exercise for him. He was not a bad man, I'd never thought that. He was a man who loved his daughter in a way that had always expressed itself outward, as doing, as organizing, as being the solution. It was the only register he knew. Eventually, he said, I'm not good at sharing importance. I know that. My wife told me that for years, and she wasn't wrong. He looked at me. I didn't set out to push you out. I want to matter to those children. When you only see them a few times a year, you try to make each visit count. I don't think I always thought about what that looks like from the other direction. It wasn't a complete apology, but it was honest. And from Neville, I understood that was not a small thing. I let out a breath. Here's what I'd like, I said. I'll continue covering Lachie's learning support through to the end of June. After that, I'd like you to take that on yourselves. Not because I want to withdraw from his life, quite the opposite. I want you to build the financial commitment to sustain his care, because that commitment matters, and because it shouldn't rest on one person indefinitely. 6 months is enough time to plan and restructure. Tom nodded. That's more than fair. Second, I'm included in Christmas, in birthdays, in the significant occasions. When Neville and Judith are up from Queenstown, that's wonderful. But I'm there too. If that requires some coordination, then we coordinate. These children have 2 sets of grandparents, and they are better for it, not more complicated by it. Of course, Fiona said quietly. Third, my Wednesday pickups and my Saturday visits continue. Those aren't a favor. They're not conditional on anything. They're what I do, and they're part of who those children know themselves to be. Lachie asks on Monday whether Wednesday is a grandpa day, Tom said. His voice was thick. He asks every week. I hadn't known that. I had to take a slow breath. Neville leaned forward. And where does that leave me? Practically speaking, it leaves you exactly where you should be, I said. A grandfather who comes, who contributes, who's genuinely present when he's here, and who doesn't try to make himself the one who counts most. There's never been a shortage of room for you in those children's lives, Neville. There never was. That was never the problem. He sat with that for a moment. Then he gave me a single, deliberate nod. We talked for another hour after that. The conversation found quieter ground. Judith, who had barely spoken, told a story about Fiona as a small child that made Fiona laugh in spite of herself. Tom talked about how much Lachie was starting to remind him of Margaret, the same careful, watchful way of paying attention to everything before he spoke. I made more coffee. Chester ambled in from the hallway and settled under the table, and nobody asked him to leave. Neville was the first to go. He paused in the doorway of the kitchen and said, without turning around, "You run a tidy meeting, Graham." Then he walked out to the car. After Judith followed, Fiona stood in the hallway and said, "I'm going to start the car. Give you 2 a minute." She touched my arm as she passed, brief, genuine, and then she was gone. Tom stayed in the doorway. "I kept thinking about Mum the whole time," he said. She'd have sorted this out about 3 years ago. She would have, I agreed. But you sorted it out yourself. He shook his head. You did. We both did. He hugged me at the door. A real hug. The kind we hadn't found our way back to since the funeral. I stood on the front step and watched their car disappear around the bend in the road. The harbor was silver in the late afternoon light. A tui was going at it somewhere in the Pohutukawa. Loud and territorial, and completely indifferent to anything that didn't concern him. I went inside and stood in the kitchen for a while in the quiet. Christmas that year was full of the small adjustments that happen when people are trying to do better. Neville was careful, measured, made a visible effort to ask me questions, rather than fill every silence himself. He sat next to me at the table and told me about a fishing trip he'd taken in Fjordland the previous autumn, and I found, to my surprise, that I was interested. He'd had a genuinely remarkable time, and he described it well. Lachie presented me with a card he'd made himself. On the front, he'd drawn the two of us at Zealandia, identifiable mainly by the fact that I was tall and wearing a blue hat. Inside, in careful, slow handwriting, the handwriting that 2 years of hard work had made possible, he'd written, "For Grandpa, you always come. Love, Lachie." 4 words in the middle of that sentence. You always come. I read them 3 times before I trusted myself to look up. Mara announced that she had also made me a card, which she had in fact made approximately 40 seconds earlier by folding a piece of paper and drawing a dog on it, which she said was Chester. It looked more like a cloud with legs. But I thanked her very seriously and told her it was an excellent likeness. Fiona made a toast before we sat down to eat. She thanked everyone for being there. And then she looked at me and said, "And we're so glad you're here, Graham. Properly glad. We mean it." Neville raised his glass. Here. Here. It wasn't the last difficult moment we'd ever have. Neville is who he is, and old habits rearranged slowly. But something shifted that December, and it held. He no longer positions himself as the grandfather who counts more. He seems to have made a genuine peace with the fact that those children have 2 grandfathers and are richer for it. Tom and Fiona took over Lachie's tutoring costs in July. Tom told me it had meant restructuring a few things, dropping a couple of subscriptions, rethinking some spending. And he said it with the quiet pride of a man who has discovered that doing a hard thing is better than having it done for you. Lachie is 8 now. He's reading ahead of his class level and has recently developed strong opinions about volcanoes, the migratory patterns of shearwaters, and why Wellington is definitively the best city in New Zealand, a point on which we are in complete agreement. Last Saturday, he told me, very seriously, that when he grows up, he wants to be a scientist who studies the ocean, because, and I am quoting him directly, "The ocean is basically the earth keeping secrets, Grandpa, and someone has to find out what they are." I think about Margaret on those Saturdays. I think about the things she taught me simply by being the person she was, how to stay when staying is hard, how to say the thing that needs saying without turning it into a weapon, how to love people well enough to be honest with them. I didn't always practice those lessons as well as I should have. I let too many things slide, told myself I was keeping the peace, when what I was actually doing was keeping the discomfort at a comfortable distance. The toy chest I built for Mara sits at the end of her bed now. Lachie has informed me that he requires one too, and we've agreed that he can help me build it in the school holidays. We've already chosen the timber. There is something I've come to understand about families that I wish someone had handed me a long time ago. Generosity without limits doesn't deepen love over time. It deepens expectation. And the people who truly love you, the ones who really mean it, don't need you to be endlessly accommodating. They need to see that you understand your own value. Because when you stop seeing it, they stop seeing it too. Not out of malice. Just out of the ease that comes from you having trained them to. The hardest conversation I ever sat down to in that kitchen turned out to be the one that saved what mattered most. Not because it fixed everything overnight, not because it changed anyone's nature in a single afternoon, but because it made us honest with each other. And honesty, even when it arrives later than it should, has a way of clearing the air so completely that you wonder how you breathed before it. If you are somewhere in the middle of this kind of situation right now, giving steadily, showing up reliably, and finding yourself quietly moved to the edges when the good days come, I want you to hear this clearly. Your presence is not worth less than your contribution. You do not earn your place in your own family by being useful. The people around you need to see you value yourself, because that is the only reliable way they will learn to value you too. Speaking up for yourself is not selfishness dressed up. It is one of the most honest and loving things you can do for them and for yourself. Know what you bring. Say the quiet thing out loud, and trust that the people who are genuinely meant to be in your life will not only stay, they will be grateful, in the end, that you gave them the chance to rise to it.